I never thought I'd be the woman who destroys her own family with lies. But here I am, sitting in this cramped Tucson apartment, trying to piece together how everything went so catastrophically wrong. My name is Lisa Rodriguez, and this is the story of how I lost everything because I couldn't face the truth about what I'd become. It started innocently enough. I was a real estate agent in Phoenix, riding the housing boom that had been going strong for years. The market was insane. Houses selling within days, bidding wars, cash offers above asking price. I was making more money than I'd ever dreamed of, finally feeling successful after years of struggling to build my client base. That's when I met Scott Williams. He was a property manager at Pinnacle Real Estate Group, one of the largest firms in Phoenix. Tall, confident, always impeccably dressed in expensive suits that made him look like he belonged in the pages of a business magazine. When he walked into a room, people noticed, including me. Our first meeting was purely professional. I was representing a buyer interested in a luxury condo he managed. Scott was knowledgeable, charming, and had this way of making me feel like the most important person in the room. After 15 years of marriage to Brian, a hard-working but predictable HVAC contractor, Scott's attention felt intoxicating. Brian and I had been together since we were young. He was steady, reliable, a good father to our 2 kids, Rachel and Ryan. But somewhere along the way, we'd settled into a routine that felt more like roommates than husband and wife. He'd come home covered in dust and sweat from crawling around in Phoenix attics, shower, eat dinner, watch TV, and go to bed. Weekends were about household chores and kids' activities. We functioned well as a team, but the romance had died years ago. Scott represented something different: excitement, passion, the feeling that I was still desirable as a woman, not just a wife, and mother who folded laundry and packed school lunches. The first time we had coffee together, I told myself it was networking. Real estate is about relationships after all. The second time, I admitted to myself that I was attracted to him. The third time, when he reached across the table and touched my hand while talking about market trends, I knew I was in trouble. "You're incredibly intelligent," he said, his fingers lingering on mine. "Your husband is lucky to have someone like you." I should have pulled my hand away, should have talked about Brian, about my kids, about all the reasons this was wrong. Instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: wanted, desired, like I was more than just Brian's wife or Rachel and Ryan's mom. The affair began slowly: extended lunches that turned into afternoon drinks, business meetings that somehow evolved into intimate conversations about our dreams and disappointments. Scott listened to me in ways Brian hadn't in years. He was interested in my thoughts about the market, my goals for growing my business, my frustrations with feeling invisible in my own life. "You deserve better," he'd tell me. "You deserve someone who sees how amazing you are." I started dressing differently, buying clothes that made me feel attractive and professional. New heels, designer blouses, jewelry that caught the light. When Brian commented on my appearance, I brushed it off as necessary business expenses. "I'm dealing with high-end clients," I'd say. "Image matters in real estate." The lies started small. Working late became my excuse for everything. Inventory meetings, I'd tell Brian. Difficult clients who can only meet after hours. Phoenix's brutal summer heat made evening appointments plausible. Many people preferred to look at houses when the temperature dropped below 100 degrees. Scott and I began meeting regularly. Coffee became lunch. Lunch became afternoon hotel visits. I'd drive across the city, to places where I was unlikely to run into anyone I knew. The Airport Marriott, boutique hotels in Old Town Scottsdale, a resort in Carefree where we'd spend hours talking and touching and pretending the rest of the world didn't exist. I justified it all in my head. Brian and I had grown apart. We were more like business partners than lovers. I deserved to feel alive again, to feel beautiful and desired. What he didn't know wouldn't hurt him. It was just physical attraction and emotional connection. Something I'd been missing for years. The secrecy became part of the thrill. Coded text messages, phone calls during lunch breaks, elaborate explanations for why I needed to show houses in different parts of the city. I bought a separate phone charger for my car, kept my laptop password protected, became an expert at covering my tracks. But secrets have a way of creating their own momentum. What started as afternoon conversations became regular hotel meetings. What began as emotional connection became physical affair. What I thought was harmless flirtation became the complete betrayal of everything I'd built with Brian over 15 years. I was living two lives. At home, I was the responsible mother helping Rachel with college applications and Ryan with algebra homework. I attended their school events, made dinner, did laundry, maintained the facade of suburban normalcy. But several times a week, I became someone else entirely. A woman having passionate encounters with a man who wasn't my husband. The worst part wasn't the sex or even the emotional intimacy. It was how easy the lies became, how naturally deception rolled off my tongue, how I could look Brian in the eye at dinner and describe fictional client meetings while my phone buzzed with messages from Scott. I told myself I wasn't hurting anyone. Brian seemed oblivious, focused on his work and the kids. He'd always been trusting, never questioning my explanations or demanding details about my schedule. If anything, he seemed pleased that my business was thriving, that I was making good money and enjoying my work. But deep down, I knew I was building towards something unsustainable. You can't maintain parallel lives indefinitely. Eventually, something has to give. The end began with something as mundane as mileage. Brian had always been meticulous about tracking vehicle expenses for his HVAC business, a habit that extended to our personal cars. I should have realized he'd noticed the inconsistencies, but I was so caught up in the excitement of the affair that I became careless. My Honda was racking up far more miles than my claimed appointments could account for. When I said I was showing houses in nearby Scottsdale, the odometer suggested I'd driven to Flagstaff and back. When I claimed to be at inventory meetings at my office, the GPS in my mind traced routes to hotels across Phoenix. I started noticing Brian watching me differently. Nothing dramatic. Yeah, just a subtle shift in how he observed my comings and goings. He'd ask casual questions about my day, wanting details about client meetings and property showings. I'd elaborate on fictional appointments, describing imaginary buyers and houses that didn't exist. "How did the showing in Ahwatukee go?" he'd ask over dinner. "Great clients," I'd lie smoothly. "They're thinking about putting in an offer, but they want to see a few more properties first." Rachel and Ryan would share stories about school, while I crafted elaborate fictions about my work life. The ease with which deception flowed from my lips should have terrified me, but I was too intoxicated by my double life to care. Then came the Tuesday when everything started unraveling. I was at the airport Marriott with Scott, lost in our usual afternoon escape from reality, when my phone rang. Brian's number. I let it go to voicemail, but the call felt ominous somehow. "Everything okay?" Scott asked, noticing my distracted expression. "Just my husband," I said, silencing the phone completely. Probably asking what I want for dinner. But something felt different that day. Brian's voicemail was casual enough, asking when I'd be home, saying he'd pick up groceries. But there was something in his tone that made me uneasy, a watchfulness I hadn't noticed before. Over the next few days, Brian seemed more attentive to my schedule. He'd ask specific questions about where I was going, when I'd be back, which properties I was showing. I attributed it to coincidence and continued with my routine, meeting Scott for our regular afternoon encounters. The irony is that I thought I was being so careful. I'd chosen hotels far from our neighborhood, paid cash when possible, kept detailed mental notes about my cover stories to avoid contradictions. What I didn't realize was that my husband had been building a case against me with the same methodical precision he brought to diagnosing HVACs problems. The day he filed for divorce papers hit me like a physical blow. I was showing an actual house, one of the few legitimate appointments I'd had that week, when the process server found me at my real estate office. "Lisa Rodriguez, you've been served." I stared at the papers in shock. Divorce. After 15 years of marriage, Brian was ending it all without warning, without discussion, without giving me a chance to explain or fix whatever was wrong. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing through possibilities. Had he found out about Scott? Was this some kind of midlife crisis? Did he have someone else? The papers gave no specifics, just legal language about irreconcilable differences and asset division. When I walked into our kitchen that evening, Brian was loading his work tools into cases, methodical and calm as always. The sight of him going about his routine while my world collapsed felt surreal. "What the hell is this?" I demanded, throwing the papers on the counter between us. "Divorce papers," he said without looking up. "I want out of this marriage." The casual way he said it, like he was discussing a broken air conditioner, made my rage flare. "Why? What did I do wrong? We've been together 15 years, Brian. You can't just throw that away. I don't think we're compatible anymore, he said, still not meeting my eyes. This isn't working for me. I started crying then, not entirely from sadness, but from panic. If Brian divorced me, everything would come out. Scott and I had talked about leaving our spouses eventually, but not like this. Not with lawyers and court proceedings and custody battles. Is there someone else? I asked, desperate to understand what was happening. No, he said simply. Then why? What changed? What did I do? We're just not compatible anymore, Lisa. I've made up my mind. The vague answers infuriated me. For weeks I begged for explanations, for specifics, for anything that would help me understand what had triggered this sudden decision. Brian remained maddeningly calm and non-committal, giving me nothing to work with. I launched a full campaign to change his mind. Tears at breakfast, emotional pleas when he came home from work, promises to be a better wife if he'd just tell me what was wrong. I told Rachel and Ryan that their father was having some kind of breakdown, that he wasn't thinking clearly. When emotional manipulation didn't work, I got angry. If he wouldn't tell me what was wrong, I'd force it out of him. I accused him of having an affair, of being cruel and heartless, of destroying our family for no reason. Fine, I finally screamed during one of our kitchen arguments. If you think I'm cheating or something, just say it. Stop being such a coward. That's when Brian gave me what I'd been demanding. I think you're having an affair. My face went hot with rage and panic. How could he possibly know? I'd been so careful, so thorough in covering my tracks. Are you insane? I yelled back. With who? When would I even have time? I'm working constantly. But even as I denied it, I could see something in his expression that terrified me. Not suspicion or paranoia, but certainty. Like he knew exactly what I'd been doing and was just waiting for the right moment to prove it. The night I called the police on Brian was the moment I crossed a line I can never uncross. Even now, 2 years later, I wake up thinking about that decision and how it revealed something ugly about my character that I didn't want to acknowledge. We were arguing in the kitchen, another fight about the divorce, another attempt by me to force explanations from him. I was getting increasingly desperate as the weeks passed without any real answers. Brian maintained his infuriating calm, giving me the same vague responses about incompatibility. When he finally admitted he thought I was having an affair, I felt cornered in a way I'd never experienced before. My first instinct was to attack, to deflect, to make him the problem instead of facing what I'd done. You're paranoid, I screamed. You're delusional. I would never cheat on you. The lies came so easily, even as my guilty conscience was screaming the truth. I grabbed a coffee mug from the counter and hurled it at the wall, where it shattered into pieces. The sound was satisfying somehow, a physical manifestation of my internal chaos. Rachel and Ryan came running downstairs, asking what was happening. Brian told them to go back to their rooms, his voice steady and parental while I was spiraling into hysteria. That's when the idea hit me. If Brian wanted to play hardball, if he was going to destroy our marriage based on suspicions, I could play that game too. In that moment of pure panic and rage, I decided to become the victim instead of the perpetrator. I waited until Brian left the kitchen to check on the kids. Then I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. I need help, I told the dispatcher, making my voice shake with what I hoped sounded like genuine fear. My husband and I were arguing about divorce, and he got physical with me. The words felt foreign coming out of my mouth. Even as I spoke them, part of me was horrified at what I was doing. But the desperate part of me, the part terrified of losing everything, pushed forward with the lie. Are you injured, ma'am? He grabbed my arm and pushed me, I said, looking down at my completely unmarked skin. I'm scared of what he might do next. Within 15 minutes, 2 Phoenix PD patrol cars were in our driveway. 4 officers approached our front door, and I felt a sick mixture of triumph and terror. I'd escalated things beyond anything Brian could control, but I had no idea how to back down from what I'd started. Brian opened the door before they could knock, calm and cooperative as always. When the lead sergeant explained they were investigating a domestic violence call, Brian's expression didn't change. There was an argument, he said honestly, but no violence. No one's been hurt. I came to the door with red eyes from crying, playing the part of the frightened wife. When the sergeant asked if I was injured, I said yes and pointed to my upper arm. He grabbed me and pushed me during our fight, I repeated, the lie becoming easier with each telling. Brian's face went pale. That's not true. I never touched her. The sergeant examined my arm where I was pointing. I could see the confusion in his expression as he found no marks, no bruising, no evidence of any physical contact. My heart was racing as I realized how flimsy my story was. But I was committed now. That's when Ryan came downstairs, my own son, looking at me with genuine confusion as the officers explained they were investigating a domestic violence call. "What are you talking about?" he asked me directly. "Dad was standing by the counter the whole time. He never came near you." In that moment, seeing my son's bewildered expression, I felt something inside me crack. This innocent kid was looking at his mother like he didn't recognize her, because I was lying to police officers in front of him. The sergeant looked at me again, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Ma'am, is it possible you misremembered what happened?" I wanted to disappear. My own child had just contradicted my story in front of 4 police officers. There was no way to maintain the lie without making Ryan into a liar too, and I couldn't bring myself to do that. Maybe I was confused. I backtracked quickly. I was really upset about the divorce. Maybe in all the emotion I thought, "Ma'am," the sergeant interrupted, his voice stern now. "Filing a false police report is a serious crime. Are you saying nothing physical happened?" I started crying again, this time from genuine shame rather than calculated manipulation. I was just so emotional about the divorce. I wasn't thinking clearly. The sergeant asked Brian if he wanted to press charges against me. I held my breath, realizing for the first time that I could actually be arrested for what I'd done. Brian declined, saying he just wanted me out of the house for the night so everyone could cool down. I packed a bag and drove to my friend Karen's apartment, my hands shaking as I replayed what had just happened. I'd lied to police officers about domestic violence. I'd tried to get my husband of 15 years arrested for something he didn't do, and I'd done it all in front of our children. Karen listened to my version of events, carefully edited to make me sound like the victim of Brian's sudden irrationality. But even as I told the story, I could hear how hollow it sounded, how convenient it was that Brian had supposedly become abusive right when I was served with divorce papers. The next morning, Ryan called me at Karen's apartment. His voice was quiet, older somehow than it had been the night before. "Why did you tell the police Dad hit you?" he asked directly. "I was right there, Mom. I saw everything." I tried to explain that I was emotional, that I wasn't thinking clearly, that sometimes people say things they don't mean when they're upset. But Ryan wasn't buying it. "That's really messed up," he said quietly before hanging up. I sat in Karen's living room, staring at the phone, realizing that I'd probably lost my son's respect forever over one moment of panic-driven stupidity. The months that followed were a nightmare of my own making. I threw myself into fighting the divorce, convinced that if I could just prove Brian was being unreasonable, somehow everything could go back to normal. I hired a divorce attorney who assured me we could contest the proceedings based on Brian's refusal to provide specific grounds. "Your husband seems to be having some kind of midlife crisis," that my lawyer told me. "Men his age sometimes make irrational decisions. We can argue that he's not thinking clearly." I clung to that narrative because it absolved me of responsibility. Brian was the problem. Brian was being cruel and unreasonable. Brian was destroying our family over nothing. I told that story to everyone who would listen. Friends, family, neighbors, anyone who asked about our separation. The hardest part was maintaining the lie about Scott. Our affair had become complicated once I was separated from Brian. Scott was also going through his own marital problems, though his wife didn't know about us yet. We'd meet at the same hotels, but the excitement was gone. What had once felt thrilling and romantic now felt sordid and desperate. "When this is all over, we can be together openly," Scott would say, but even he sounded uncertain now. The reality of leaving our spouses and blending our families was more complicated than our fantasy had suggested. I kept working, kept showing houses, kept pretending my life wasn't falling apart. My colleagues knew about the divorce, but not the reasons behind it. I played the role of the wronged wife whose husband had inexplicably decided to abandon 15 years of marriage. Rachel was preparing for college applications, stressed about SATs and essays while her parents' marriage imploded around her. I tried to maintain normalcy for her sake, but she could sense the tension. She'd ask careful questions about why her father had suddenly wanted a divorce, and I'd give her the same non-answers Brian had given me. "Dad won't tell me what's wrong," I'd say. "He just says he's not happy anymore." Ryan was quieter, more withdrawn. Ever since the night with the police, he'd looked at me differently, not with hostility, but with a wariness that broke my heart. He'd be polite when I called to arrange visits, but the easy affection between us was gone. During this time, I convinced myself that Brian was bluffing somehow, that he'd eventually come to his senses and realize he was throwing away a good marriage over nothing. My lawyer kept pushing for reconciliation conferences, arguing that Brian's behavior suggested emotional instability rather than genuine grounds for divorce. I had no idea that while I was building my victim narrative, Brian was sitting on evidence that would destroy every lie I'd told. The court hearing was scheduled for February. I felt confident going in. My attorney had prepared a strong case about Brian's sudden, unexplained desire to end an otherwise stable marriage. We'd argue that he was having some kind of psychological crisis, that his accusations of infidelity were paranoid delusions. I dressed carefully that morning, professional but sympathetic, the image of a wife whose world had been turned upside down by her husband's inexplicable behavior. I'd been practicing my story for months. Brian was the one being unreasonable. I was the victim. Here. When we arrived at the courthouse, Brian was already there with his attorney, looking calm and prepared. I'd expected him to seem nervous or uncertain. After all, what evidence could he possibly have for his suspicions? I'd been so careful, so thorough in covering my tracks. The hearing began with my attorney presenting our case. He painted a picture of a stable 15-year marriage suddenly destroyed by Brian's unfounded paranoia and refusal to work on our relationship. He mentioned the false police report as an example of how emotional the situation had become, spinning it as evidence of my distress rather than my dishonesty. Mrs. Rodriguez has been a devoted wife and mother, my lawyer argued. She's done nothing to deserve this treatment. Her husband's accusations are based on suspicion rather than fact. I sat there nodding, playing my part perfectly. The wronged wife, the victim of baseless accusations, the woman trying to save her marriage while her husband destroyed their family over paranoid fantasies. Then the judge asked Brian's attorney if they had evidence to present. "Yes, Your Honor," Mark Johnson said, standing up with a thick folder in his hands. My blood turned to ice as he began laying out photographs on the table in front of the judge. Even from across the courtroom, I could see what they were. Pictures of me and Scott, entering hotels together, kissing in his car, walking hand in hand through restaurant parking lots. The judge started reviewing the evidence methodically, photo after photo, video after video, all time-stamped and documented. Dates I recognized, hotels I remembered. Moments I thought were private and secret, all captured by someone with a camera. My lawyer looked genuinely shocked. He kept glancing at me like he was seeing me for the first time, realizing that everything I'd told him for months had been lies. The devoted wife narrative crumbled with every photograph the judge examined. There were pictures from the airport Marriott, the boutique hotel in Scottsdale, the resort in Carefree where Scott and I had spent entire afternoons. GPS data showing my car at locations that had nothing to do with real estate showings. Phone records documenting hundreds of calls and texts to Scott's number. Brian had known everything. For months, while I was telling everyone he was paranoid and delusional, he'd been sitting on evidence that proved every detail of my affair. The careful way he'd avoided giving me specifics about his accusations suddenly made sense. He wasn't paranoid, he was strategic. My lawyer asked for a recess to speak with me privately. We went into a side room, where he looked at me with barely concealed disgust. "Why didn't you tell me about any of this?" he demanded. "I thought he was just suspicious," I whispered, but even I could hear how pathetic that sounded. "There are dozens of photos, Lisa, hotel receipts, GPS tracking data. This isn't suspicion. This is documentation of a months-long affair." When we returned to the courtroom, I felt like I was walking to my own execution. My lawyer informed the judge that we were no longer contesting the divorce and agreed to all proposed terms. There was no point in fighting anymore. The evidence was overwhelming, and every lie I'd told over the past 8 months had been exposed in the most public way possible. The judge granted Brian primary custody of Rachel and Ryan, citing my demonstrated pattern of dishonesty, both in the marriage and in these proceedings. He specifically mentioned the false police report as evidence of my character. I got every other weekend and alternating holidays, a punishment that felt both too harsh and completely deserved. I walked out of that courtroom knowing that everyone who mattered had seen the truth about who I really was. Not the victim I'd portrayed myself as for months, but a liar who'd betrayed her family and tried to destroy an innocent man rather than face the consequences of her choices. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Within days, news of the court proceedings had spread through Phoenix's tight-knit real estate community. Scott's wife found out about our affair and immediately filed for divorce, taking him for everything in a way that made my settlement look generous. Clients started canceling appointments. My reputation in the industry was destroyed. I quit my job at the real estate firm within a month. The humiliation of facing colleagues who'd heard about the court case was unbearable. Scott and I tried to make our relationship work after everything came out. After all, we destroyed our marriages for each other. But without the excitement of secrecy, without the thrill of stolen moments, we discovered we had very little in common. The reality of actually being together was nothing like our fantasy. We were two damaged people clinging to each other out of desperation. Rather than love, our affair had been built on lies and excitement, not on any foundation that could support a real relationship. We broke up after 3 months, and Scott moved to Las Vegas to start over. Rachel finished her senior year while the family fell apart around her. She got into a good college but refused my help with essays or applications. "I'll handle it myself," she said coldly when I offered assistance. The daughter who used to tell me everything now treated me like a stranger she had to be polite to. Ryan was worse. He'd answer my calls but keep conversations short and surface level. When I asked about school or friends, he'd give one-word answers. The night I'd lied to the police had shattered something between us that I couldn't repair. "Why did you do it, Mom?" he asked me once during a painful visit. "Why did you lie about Dad hitting you when you knew I was right there?" I tried to explain that I was scared, that I wasn't thinking clearly, that people do desperate things when they feel trapped. But how do you explain to your 16-year-old son that his mother is capable of such calculated dishonesty? The worst part was watching Brian build a new life. He kept the kids in the same schools, maintained their routines, helped Rachel with college applications. He started dating someone he met through work, a divorced woman who understood what it was like to rebuild after betrayal. The kids liked her, which hurt more than I wanted to admit. I eventually moved to Tucson, 2 hours south of Phoenix, where nobody knew my story. I got a job as a receptionist at a physical therapy clinic, a humbling step down from my real estate career, but honest work. I rented a small apartment and tried to rebuild some kind of life from the wreckage I'd created. The kids visit occasionally, but our relationships remain strained. They're polite but distant, like they're visiting an aunt they don't know very well. Rachel graduated from college. Last year with honors, Ryan is studying engineering and doing well. They've both grown into thoughtful, principled young adults despite what I put them through. Brian remarried 2 years ago. The kids were in the wedding. I heard about it through Rachel's carefully neutral mention of the event. He found someone who values honesty and commitment, someone who won't destroy their family for the excitement of an affair. Sitting here now, I can trace every moment where I could have made different choices. I could have ended things with Scott before they became physical. I could have talked to Brian about our marriage problems instead of seeking excitement elsewhere. I could have admitted my mistakes when he confronted me instead of lying for months. Most of all, I could have faced the truth instead of calling the police and trying to destroy a good man who'd done nothing wrong except discover what I'd been hiding. The affair was a symptom of deeper problems. My need for validation, my inability to face difficult truths about myself, my willingness to deceive people I loved rather than do the hard work of honest communication. Scott wasn't the cause of my marriage's end. He was just the method I chose to destroy it. I lost everything because I couldn't face what I'd become, a woman who put her own immediate gratification above her family's well-being, someone who would lie to police rather than accept responsibility for her choices, a mother who taught her children that people you trust most can betray you completely. The insight that haunts me most is this: Brian didn't destroy our marriage by filing for divorce. I destroyed it months earlier with every lie I told and every choice I made to prioritize my affair over my family. The divorce was just Brian's way of making official what I'd already done in secret. Sometimes the person you think is your victim is actually just the one brave enough to face the truth you've been running from.